Welcome to the Healers Café, the number one show for medical practitioners and holistic healers to have heart to heart conversations about their day to day lives while sharing their expertise for improving your health and wellness. Welcome to the Healers Cafe. And today I have with me Maria Maldonado Smith, otherwise known as Maria Smith, and she's the Chief Empowerment Officer of the MMS Consulting and creator of the Executive Vision Imaginary program. Now, she has quite a past with corporate, in the corporate space, also a sales leader of Fortune 500 companies. And I think it just keeps going on. And certainly your life has proven that you can definitely have a focus and achieve it. And I'll let you talk a little bit about that. But I wanted to welcome you to the Healers Cafe and to our spontaneous discussion about how one does all this envisioning and actually get our dreams and goals come true.
Ah, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate being able to talk about what I'm extremely passionate about. I think probably my bio or resume would show that uh, you can have many dreams I've worked with and see them through to fruition. I've worked in three different industries across four different, Fortune 500 companies, and spent 11 years in sales leadership, and then had an epiphany on a bridge in Scotland and decided that the life I'd spent 17 years building was not a life that I wanted to live anymore. But the great thing is that the person standing next to me, which was my husband, and have been married 20 years in July, it was the best thing that came out of all of it was that he was thankfully there to experience that moment with me. And I was able to share with him that I wanted to put a new plan in place and that I wanted to put a plan in place to leave corporate and do what I truly felt was put on my heart. I felt that it was a calling because if you'd asked me even 6 months prior, I would have told you that I wanted to stay in corporate for the rest of my life and retire at 65 and travel the world and call it a day. But the Lord had other plans for me, so I felt that calling and started to put things in motion.
Mhm. So what is it that you then currently do? What is this calling and your focus currently?
Yeah, so, and thank you for that. I know sometimes it can be a little convoluted sometimes to explain to people. They're like, "What, you do vision boards?" I start with saying that I wrote down a goal that I had, and it just came to me throughout thinking about and envisioning my own life and process, and I said, I feel like my purpose and I feel like my goal in this life is to change the world one vision board at a time. Now, what does that really mean? Well, I've been envisioning things, using vision boarding as a tool and as a resource throughout my life since I was 8 years old. I had a teacher who introduced this idea or concept of getting out a piece of paper and writing down three goals on a piece of paper. And so I did that. I transferred those goals onto a post it note. I stuck it on my mirror at home later that day. It stayed on my mirror for 10 years. I was 18 years old, headed off to college. And the first goal on that post it note was to graduate from college because I was the daughter of an immigrant with an eighth grade education. My mom never had an opportunity to attend a 4 year university. So education was very, very much impressed upon us when we were younger. And the fact that, I mean, I live in the US and we have the opportunity to obtain a free education, like you got to take advantage of that opportunity. So that was the first goal that I wrote and I was on my way to accomplishing it. And then the second goal that I wrote was that I wanted to be Miss Kentucky. I wanted to be Miss Kentucky ever since I was really, really little, and I wrote that down on my post-it note because I've been watching the Miss America pageant with my mom, and so I started competing my freshman year of college. So as I headed off to college to hopefully accomplish that first goal, I was also simultaneously trying to accomplish that second goal, and then the third one was a little bit more long term, but it did definitely drive my major in college. I wrote that I wanted to be a United States senator. I have no plans of doing that anymore. but because I love what I'm doing now. But it did guide me. I was a political science major, so I graduated in 2004 with a political science degree from the University of Kentucky, and and then yeah, I interned in Washington for under Secretary Elaine Chao in the Department of Labor, and had I mean, and worked on some political campaigns and enjoyed it, but I kind of got a feel for what that life would look like and decided that really wasn't for me. And so I started taking this process really into my home at first. That's really where it started. Before I took it into corporations or even into my own company at the time, I I I took it into my home because I thought, you know what, if I can set the vision for my life in my home and with my family, then everything else will be really good. And I think when I was going through this process of re-envisioning what my life looked like, I realized that I had gotten really far from what I had been envisioning all those years, which was to stay grounded and centered in my family first and then my work second. And it had definitely flip flopped. And so I think that calling really was as much of a calling of me fulfilling my purpose, but also calling me back to myself.
Mhm, mhm. Well, it's interesting what how you're describing. It's like we may have aspirations and dreams,
Mhm,
and they give us a direction, but at
mhm,
any moment in time, we're still agents of our own destiny. We can still say, "Wait a minute, now that I really know what it feels like, nah, it's not quite right for me," right? And shift it, and then also realize that maybe the values were not fully aligned. So that the dreams and the values need to be aligned if you're really wanting to feel into the into the
yeah.
manifestation of it, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes. My process starts with core values because I think fundamentally that's where we miss the mark is that
right.
we kind of wander through life, especially as we're, children. And I have an 8-year-old, a 15-year-old, and a 17-year-old. And so many times I find myself just grabbing them and being like, but remember what's really important to you. Because while grades are great and it's great to be a straight A student and all the things, like at the end of the day, what do you value about that? What is it that's really important to you? About that because it can't just be about getting the grade. It has to be something deeper than that. And so that's my attempt as mom and as someone who does this for their life as a consultant to businesses. I really want to press upon that because I think a lot of us, I think this whole idea of this midlife crisis was really born out of the fact that we wake up one day and realize, what have I been doing in my life? I never asked myself what I want. I never decided who I wanted to become, and I never answered the question of what it is I want to create out of my life or what I want to create in general. And so, because of that, we just allow ourselves to be aimlessly driven through life. And we wind up at this point where we're dissatisfied and we think it takes drastic measures in order to make us new, when really we just have to get recentered with asking ourselves those three questions.
Mm. Yeah, and so the three questions, just to be clear, are so go ahead.
Yes, yeah, the 3 questions are, "What do I want?" And
Yeah,
which I think is interesting because a lot of people can't even answer that question.
oh, for sure.
Like, you ask them, "What do you want?" "I don't know, I don't know." The second one is, "Who do you wanna become?" Like, I think there's a larger emphasis, especially here in the US, put on, like, what you wanna become. We start asking kids that from this time they're in kindergarten, "What do you wanna be when you grow up? What do you wanna become?" Instead of focusing on who. And I think especially in today's world where we could all be a little kinder to each other and a lot more understanding, I think focusing on the who we want to become, it would be globally beneficial.
Yes.
And then the third question is, what do I want to create? Because I think we all wanna create something in our life, and it doesn't have to be incredibly grand. It doesn't have to be rocket science. It doesn't have to be, the patent for some, innovative new idea or product that doesn't exist. It can be that you wanna create peace and harmony in your life, that you wanna live a life that is intentional. You wanna create intentional and intention and purpose. You wanna create a minimalistic approach to the way that you live. It can be a myriad of things. It's all in how you interpret it. But I think in answering those three questions, we kind of get to this greater and deeper understanding of who we are and what our purpose is in the greater like meaning of life.
Mhm, mhm. So how do you deal with, because I mean in our at Bowen College, right? I have students that I train in the methodology, which is a natural pain elimination technique. But that's the easy part. The part that's challenging to a lot of practitioners
Mhm.
is actually having the guts, the know-how, the what it takes to be an entrepreneur,
Mhm.
actually get out there and imagine, you know, doing the work that,
Mhm.
by the end of the training is easy to do, right? It's not the skill set missing. And so I realized when I created the college, I had to create this whole other part to make sure that, not just, 5% of the graduates, but 95% of the graduates actually practice this modality. Otherwise, what's the point,
Right,
So,
right.
I do quite a bit of this work, and I have a program called Create, which is about that aspect, creating and envisioning how we're moving, okay? But this is all about people who already know what
Mhm.
they want to put out in the world, right? Well, first of all, do you have anything to add to that um, from your, because this is obviously your
Mhm.
field.
Yeah,
What could you say to them that might be helpful? Because a lot of them are listening. So
yeah,
I want to make sure I answer their questions as well.
absolutely, absolutely. Well, I would say one, I think there's beauty in approaching any type of environment that is uncomfortable. There's a wonderful, like, yeah, I always say that people who go forward with entrepreneurship, I think they always find, even 10 days in, 10 years in, if they'd known what they were getting into, maybe would have made a different decision. So I always applaud people who are in entrepreneurship and that decide to make that move, because it's so much more than people could ever. It's like motherhood. Like, you can never describe it fully, and you think you can, and you think you can prepare people for what entrepreneurship is going to bring, and then you never can adequately describe it. So I think there's that piece of it. And then I also think that there's something beautiful in abandoning goals that no longer work for us. And I don't think that we talk about that enough, because so much of our focus has always been put on, but did you accomplish the goal? But maybe the goal was never meant to be accomplished. Maybe it was meant that you were supposed to learn something through that process that led you in a different path. And that's how I chose to view my whole 17-year career, because I could have looked back and said, like, well, that was a waste. I don't know what I just did. I just wasted 17 years of my life. Instead, I chose to say, you know what? That was a beautiful lesson that I learned. And I take all of the good, the bad, the ugly, the indifferent, the positive, everything. And I molded it into this process that I now can follow, because I think the last piece of it is the discipline. Like, we have to have discipline and consistency in order to stay with it. And I think the people that make it, the people that do practice what they preach, it's because they're disciplined in doing that in a consistent way.
And how do you experience discipline? Like, in other words, you have a goal. So let's take one of the students who w- sincerely wants to help people, is
Mhm.
super excited that now they have the skill to,
Mhm.
and they have to set up the office, which, okay, there's lots of things there to
Yep. Yeah.
cut through. But where does the discipline, can you kind of explain how you
Yeah.
put heart behind discipline, basically?
Yeah. So I think there's definitely a process. Like I said, my process is 5 steps. I talk about core values. I talk about, a purpose statement, having that purpose statement. And especially if you're setting up like a physical office, I would print that purpose statement out and put it right in front of you to where you can see it, and where everyone who comes into your office that you're trying to help knows exactly what your mission is and what you're trying to accomplish by helping them. The third thing is, I always choose a word of the year. So it's going to change throughout the year, but I always put it plastered in the middle of my board. So I have a word of the year. And then the fourth step of the process is to break down those goals and to really have those goals. And then the fifth step is building positive habits. We plan for that. We plan for what that looks like. We plan for the peaks, the valleys, the ups and the downs. And we use the smarter process, which is being very specific about a goal, being, measuring it, making sure it's achievable. Is it relevant? Meaning, is it worthwhile? Is this worthwhile me accomplishing? Can I do it within a time bound reference point? Am I evaluating my progress, and how am I rewarding myself? So I
Mhm.
think all of that is really my process. Now I think implementing that in some for someone who really wants to help others, I think what that looks like at the discipline and the consistency is not getting discouraged when someone doesn't listen to what you tell them. That's like, we've all heard the term like the ask hole. Because the person who asks for advice or who shows up at your door and says, I want you to help me, but then everything you share with them, they somehow discount, or you know just they don't acknowledge, or they think, I know it better. I would say that there's discipline in understanding that you're not gonna be for everyone. And so there's a massive level of consistency and discipline that has to be employed, because that's when, like, we call it the grind. Like, it's just that grind of like putting one foot in front of the other. You're not gonna hit every ball, out of the park. It's not gonna be a home run every time.
What would your life be like if you were pain free? If you were one of the millions who suffer from chronic pain, the thought of just one day without it may seem impossible. This is often because conventional medicine tends to fall short in the treatment of pain, opting to prescribe pills or recommend surgery rather than getting to the root cause of the problem. But if you are suffering with emotional or physical pain, there is hope. Join the founder and CEO of Bowen College, Manon Bolliger, live online for your body-mind reboot. Learn how to listen to your symptoms and get to the root cause of your pain. Plus, be trained in basic Bowen therapy moves so that you can reboot your body for optimal health. You don't have to live in pain. You can heal. Stop the pain pill cycle by visiting www.yourbodymindreboot.com to learn more and to register.
And so I think that's where a lot of discipline comes in, is literally willing ourselves sometimes to get up every day and face the uncertainty of what might be.
Mhm. And it just made me think of one other point that I see commonly with my students is they will they will put time aside for their business, but and I think it's human nature, but they'll avoid the things that might actually help them the most. So in other words, they'll go through emails and they'll respond and whatever, but like if they're new to the area or to the community, they haven't gone to knock on other therapists' doors, introduce themselves, suggest to go for lunch, have a conversation about what they can offer, and vice versa. Like actually build that, which is, it's like, oh gosh, then I have to meet people. I mean, some people it's natural, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep.
But a
People
lot of people, it's not.
Yep.
They just wanna deal with the patients and, the rest, they think they can be found, you know? I mean, eventually, you'll be found if your reputation, is great, but when you're starting a business, you don't necessarily have that reputation yet, right?
Right. Right.
It's
And you
like
have to build that.
yeah, and it's choosing the actions, not just being busy doing actions,
Mhm. And
right?
that's where I think, yes, and that's exactly where I think that process of being specific, because when you know what you're specifically trying to accomplish, it makes it a little bit easier. I'm not saying like I'm more of a natural born networker, and I'm more extroverted than I am introverted. Although as I get older and the more I work kind of alone and by myself, I feel like I'm becoming way more introverted than I ever was. And I find a lot of comfort in being a homebody. But I still know that I have to, for my business, I have to put myself out there. And so I think that's where the preparedness and the discipline of creating even just a few talking points about what it is you're trying to accomplish, that's where, like, get very specific on, why am I knocking on this therapist's door? What are the three things I would want them to help me with, or that I want them to take away from our interaction? And then also maybe a way that you could support each other, because everyone likes to feel like when you're calling on them for something that you're also going to be reciprocating that potentially in the future, even if you couldn't do it right, if you can't do it right now, but that the door is going to swing both ways. And so I think those are two things to be mindful of when we think about connection and support, because we all need it. And especially to grow a business, we have to have it. And I will say that that's probably one of the things that a lot of business owners, especially small business owners and entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, the mistake that they make is focusing on all the other things that are more task oriented, that they feel, well, this makes me feel like I'm getting stuff done, when in reality, we're really just on that hamster wheel of task related, issues to the business, when what would actually be driving the business more, to your point, is getting out, knocking on doors, meeting people, creating those action driven plans where they have more of a process to follow, because that process then creates that action for them.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think part of it is inviting what you're uncomfortable with, and not just going, oh, yeah, no, I'm not comfortable with that. But so my vision, I really feel into my vision, and that's
Mhm.
not in my vision. Well,
Yes.
hey, maybe
Yeah.
maybe you have to invite,
Yeah.
all of it into your
Yeah.
life, right? Yeah.
For sure, for sure. And I think some of those, those responses too are emotional. I mean, they're very much emotional triggers. Like, we procrastinate because of emotional, triggers that of things. So much of this is tied to, it's not that we're lazy. It's not that we have to get to the root of the problem. We've got to uncover the source. And maybe it is that, speaking to people just absolutely terrifies you. And so that's where you gotta, okay, well, it's not that I don't want to network. It's just that it terrifies me to speak to people, or that I feel I'm going to say the wrong thing. So this is where you practice with people that you know, or people that are familiar with you, because that's where you start to then that decreases over time, and you start to become more confident and more comfortable in your capabilities. But that all takes work, and it takes discipline and practice.
Mhm. So I want to switch gears a little bit to other listeners who
Yeah.
are people with all kinds of conditions and
Mhm.
labeled diseases and pain, and it could be emotional pain, could be physical pain. But this is my question to you here is, and I'll give you a little bit of context for it so that we can talk about it more more fully. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
But where do you see the vision board working for people in pain? So let me give you the context first. So,
Okay. Okay.
so and this is how I train my students as well. When people come in and they say, "Oh, I have frozen shoulder, I have sciatica, I have whatever," um, I ask them typically, what are three things in your life that you would like to change if you had a magic wand?
Mhm.
And what that does is it actually shows the most important things in their life, which allows then me to tap into the purpose and their vision,
Mhm.
which then makes the whatever they need to do about their pain um, easier to contextualize within a bigger picture that they believe in, right? So that's how most people are set up in our treatment protocols. But I haven't used a vision board, and I'm wondering, there are people with, chronic pain
Mhm.
that are, and I'm going to let's talk about physical, because I
Mhm.
think emotional is a little more different, nuanced.
Mhm.
But how would you use a vision board? And they're probably listening now, so feel free to share whatever you think is helpful to them. But how do you do that effectively, given that they're probably getting some treatments here and there, and they're trying different things? And how do you help those people with a vision board?
Well, I would say a couple things, and I know we touched on this briefly before we started, but pain definitely does reveal what matters most to us, and so I love that they are able to write those three things that kind of are the most important to them, or that would make them the happiest or the most fulfilled. And I would say that as far as it comes to physical pain, from what I know about the research and neuroscience, because I use a lot of neuroscience backed information in my work, is that the same chemicals in the brain that respond to emotional pain are the same ones that are responding to physical pain. So it's all very much inextricably linked. And so what I would suggest is to sometimes that physical pain is very hard to push through because you're feeling it. So the way I would use the vision board is, how would it feel to you to not have this pain? What does that look like visually? Because the feel of it, we
Right.
feel it every day and we're living with it. So we feel it every day. So then the visual becomes, and even the guided meditation that would accompany that would be envisioning yourself without that physical pain. And then the pictures and the images that I would have patients or participants in a workshop outline would be, find the images that describe those positive feelings for you, because images are very powerful. And when we align, like, so when we see a vision, we're actually activating, we see a visual image, we're activating a part of our brain, the reticular activating system. And that's essentially creating that information funnel that is weeding out unnecessary information. And so, because so many of our thoughts are negative, we have 60 to 80,000 thoughts a day, and I think about 70% of them are negative. So think about that from a pain standpoint. Probably a lot of those negative thoughts would could be or coincide with that physical pain. I'm never going to be able to do this, or I'm never going to feel better. I'm not going to feel this. And that's really what we're trying to work against, because the vision board is actually trying to say, you know what, but there will be a time, or we can get there. The physical pain cannot be my barrier to everything. I still have the ability of my mind and my mindset, and it's very powerful when we can activate that reticular activating system to see images that emote that emotional response, which, like we said, is still tied to the same type of chemical response as physical pain. And so when we elicit those images and we invite them into our daily mindset, that's the other thing. It has to be daily. That's where a lot of that discipline and consistency comes from. People say, oh, I did a vision board and then I threw it in a corner and didn't see it for 6 months to a year. It's got to be something you're looking at daily. But if you do that and look at it daily, over time, you do start to condition yourself to seeing, okay, now I know what I'm looking for. And now when I leave my house, or I'm in the car, or I'm at work, or I'm engaging with friends of mine, that physical pain isn't there, because the image in the back of my mind is friends laughing carelessly together and having a really fun time together. And so I'm able to minimize that pain. Doesn't mean that it's going to go away, and it's not going to be it's not going to be a solve for everything, but it's at least a step in the right direction. And that's how I would guide participants, is to really be very thoughtful and intentional about the images that they're putting on their board, that truly align with the kind of person that they want to be pain-free.
Mhm. And it makes a lot of sense. And the idea here is that it's what they want to see. But
Mhm.
as they see it, they're actually feeling it, which is part of that whole manifesting. You have to see it, believe it, feel it,
Yeah.
and put
Yeah.
energy towards it, right? And then when the pain returns, because in chronic pain, it's going to have such patterns, um, it's also a tool maybe that they can bring in to shift the the pain focus. Because my understanding of this, and I'm not an expert in this part of it, but at least clinically what I've seen is that the mind can really impact the physicality to the point where maybe there's new neural pathways that are actually happening,
Mhm.
where the pain really will go away. Because I mean, if there's an obvious cause to pain like inflammation, we can work on it that way. But there is a mental emotional component which I think does work with the mind, right? I mean, does that seem consistent with your understanding?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Very much consistent. And I think to your point, when it represents itself, I think it's an opportunity for us to acknowledge that it's back, and maybe what had we been doing prior to that
Right.
to mitigate those feelings, physically, of feeling that pain. And is there that response? I think that it's the same thing when we get off track with our goals or our life in general. And then we come back to that and we get recentered. We realize, oh, it was just because I got off course. I wasn't doing consistently what I said I was going to do. And that's why I was feeling the way I was feeling. And I think it works both for our emotional thoughts, feelings, actions, results about our life, as it the same that it does for the thoughts, feelings, actions, results of our physical, our physical well-being.
Good. Okay. Well, I can't believe our time is already up. So maybe I'll just leave you a closing few words, and yeah, thank you for sharing your knowledge with us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I truly appreciate it. And I love talking about the power of vision imagery, because there is so much neuroscience linked to it. And the thing is less than 3% of Americans, I mean, globally it's about 18 to 20%, but less than 3% of Americans were really bad at sitting down and writing out our goals. And I think, if anything, what it does is it gives us a sense of control and a sense of purpose as well. Anytime we kind of get off, think about any path in life, whether it's a diet plan that you're not heeding, but that when you stick to it, you feel better. You wake up, you're lighter, you have more clarity. I think that's ultimately what the vision board is leading you to, is greater clarity. It's not definitive, it's not perfect, it's not set in stone, it's not a contract, but it's definitely a compass that can guide you and that can hopefully lead you in a direction where you feel empowered, um, and in control of your situation, whether it's starting a business, whether it is helping a patient, whether it is you yourself or someone dealing with that chronic, physical pain. That the board really can be a guide for who you envision yourself to be 6 months from now, a year from now, 5 years from now, however it works best for you. I always tell people there's no right or wrong way to vision board, other than not doing one and not sitting with it every single day, and spending some time, just like you would spend time on your business, spend time with your board, because I think both hand in hand will be very positive. And same thing, just like you would work on maybe physical therapy and working through your physical pain, sit with your board and let it speak to you in that way.
Well, we'll end with that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us at the Healers Café. If you haven't already done so, please like, comment, and subscribe with notifications on, as I post a new podcast every Wednesday with tons of useful information and tips for natural healing that you won't want to miss.